It is time for a call to action. The Lord of the Rings is one of the most famous literary pieces in damn near human history, and one of the best-selling books as well, with over 150 million copies sold. J.R.R. Tolkien's remarkable work has been translated into 38 languages, and despite its incredible success and adoption into both movies and video games, it has managed to remain remarkably free of wokeist infiltration, of modern-day politics, and all the other filthy things that has absolutely nothing to do in Middle-earth, and yet has seemingly corrupted every other great franchise out there. And why is this? It is because of the steadfast and honorable gatekeeping of the Tolkien estate, which I guarantee you has turned down near astronomic stacks of cash again and again and again, purely for the sake of maintaining and keeping this wonderful setting what it is and should always be. Yet complacency is forever the enemy. And if you, who are true fans of The Lord of the Rings, do not stand up now, do not actively gatekeep now, you may be living in the last few years of The Lord of the Rings being allowed to remain what it is. The Amazon big budget TV series is coming out later this year, and we are already seeing one of the largest fan sites, the OneRing.net, which of course has a Twitter account, demonstrate to us just how deep the infiltration has already progressed. They are building their straw men to justify the banning, the deleting, and the censoring of anyone who dares speak out against their chosen form of politics. We will be going through this series of tweets here a little bit closer, but I just want to make it absolutely clear here before we begin. This will not happen by itself. Gatekeeping is a continuous process that requires near never-ending vigilance, because those who want to ruin the setting by polluting it with modern-day nonsense, dragging in 2020s politics into a 1950s book series, are relentless. Utterly convinced that they and they alone are possessed of the one truth, the greater good, and by definition, no action, no matter how heinous, lowly, or downright evil, could possibly be bad. And the complete and utter ruination and subversion of a fantasy universe they claim to love is nothing more than a worthwhile sacrifice, a lamb to the slaughter, placed upon the altar of inclusivity, diversity, and progress, for progress's sake. You must gatekeep now, or risk seeing it forever lost. You must make the argument now, and you must protect the lore, the setting, and the canon now, before it's all much, much too late. So let's take a look at this series of tweets then, shall we, that demonstrate so well why this is a matter of utmost importance. It starts, of course, with the justification, the building of a straw man, the greater good, again in whose name no ban, no censorship, or no silencing is a step too far. We've been dealing with homophobic comments for decades, and it's still wrong. Whatever toxic arguments are being said now about a lot of fandom and adaptations is the same trash that said Ian McKellen was the worst affront to Tolkien's legacy ever, #Pride. This, of course, taking place during the beginning of Pride Month. Anyone who states in this day and age that homosexual acceptance is non-existence is an absolutely disingenuous moron, out after absolutely nothing than using a universally accepted thing, namely gay pride, to push their own agenda. We have a Pride Month. That alone should tell you everything you need to know about the level of acceptance of people who are gay in our modern day society. And this thing too said that Ian McKellen was the worst affront to Tolkien's legacy ever. What I find interesting is the responses are almost nothing than people saying, who said this? Who mentioned this? Do you have proof? Are there screenshots of this? Who the hell said any of that? The only person who even deigns to mention it is this guy who claims that, oh no, he was totally there when people were saying that Ian McKellen was the worst thing to happen to the Lord of the Rings ever. It was totally a thing, guys, but don't at me, I don't care what you think. Bullshit. Absolute bullshit, in my opinion. Furthermore, there are countless messages like, for example, this one, which perfectly illustrates the reality of the situation. This person didn't even know that Ian McKellen was gay. Why? Because he was a professional actor, first and foremost. He played a role, the role of Gandalf. And that's all he did, and he did so excellently. Gandalf was never a character that was openly gay, as they would say today. His sexuality never entered into the picture because, frankly, in a war that determines the future of the world, what hole you like to stick your winker into is, frankly, completely and utterly irrelevant. And I would also like to stress here, Ian McKellen was not only openly homosexual, he was politically homosexual, in that he actively championed and campaigned against laws that he perceived as repressive. He championed greater inclusivity back when that actually meant something. In fact, he came out as gay whilst debating against a political measure that he disagreed with live on radio, I believe, sometime in 1988. And as a further point that homosexuality is not a problem in modern day society, did Ian McKellen's career tank immediately? Was he ostracized by all of his friends and family, by wider society? No. He was knighted a few years later as Sir Ian McKellen. But again, he was a professional first and foremost. When he played the role of Gandalf, he played as Gandalf, whose, again, sexuality was simply just not relevant. Nor is it relevant today in the setting of The Lord of the Rings. Conscient, respectful debate on Tolkien is always welcome, but anything that people say with a but positioned like this means absolutely nothing. Homophobic, racist, misogynistic trash is always a case for banning. It's not what Tolkien fandom is, wants, or welcomes. We used to be able to ban in the era of message boards and IRC, but the area of social media, the platforms can't keep toxicity out of our community, bemoaning their inability to gatekeep hard enough. And what does these words mean? Homophobic, racist, misogynistic, la la la. These words used to mean something. Now they mean less than nothing. Homophobia, racism, and misogyny have become nothing more than weapons with which to beat people over the head with and justify their banning. And even in this case, we can mute and block, but that's only for this account's feed. Twitter is not a community simply because it lacks anti-troll tools. Nasty people still show up in replies because their toxic friend subtweeted us. The people who always welcome respectful debate, are of course, as always, bemoaning their inability to simply remove their opposition entirely from the field of debate. And we continue on with the straw man to justify this. The whisker-thin excuse that they use to simply toss anyone they disagree with out of the arena. If you still think Ian McKellen is the worst and the Catholic Tolkien would have never approved, I beg you to read more of Tolkien's books and letter. He was woke, stood against hate, embraced all culture in life and fiction. It's why his books are translated in every language. Tolkien was woke. Tolkien, as a devoted Catholic, would look at today's definition of woke, and let us bring this up in relevancy to Pride Month. What do you think Tolkien, again, a devout Catholic, would think about things like this, or this, or this? Yeah. I don't think that's a particularly difficult question. Furthermore, Tolkien was also a huge fan of language. He studied language and was deeply fascinated by the science of the written word. He was a fan of meaning, of definitions, of the reality presented to us through literature. He would absolutely hate and condemn the modern day left, which, as again mentioned, has taken these words, homophobia, racism, and misogyny, words that have been universally recognized as bad for the last half century, and reduced them to nothing more than cudgels. Tolkien would despise this. No question about it. If you think Ian McKellen gets a pass, but whatever Amazon is doing is a disgrace to Tolkien, please think more on your personal bias before tweeting. Our block button is very active, and if you retweet, enable toxic voices in the name of free speech, you do not love Tolkien. Tolkien was also, I'd like to point out, a vehement opponent of the Nazis in Germany. People who were not exactly pro-free speech. Tolkien would certainly not condone this either. And I also want to point out as well, yes, Ian McKellen does get a quote-unquote pass, as they put it, because his sexuality was, and I will repeat this point as many times as necessary, never an issue. It was never a point, and again, he was political in this. He fought actively to end what little discrimination still existed in the world in the 1980s and early 90s, and yet it still did not prevent him from playing the role of Gandalf. What are the odds that Amazon will follow in his proud and venerable footsteps? That is two. The word pride. Yet another word that has been completely murdered and molested by the modern day fake left. Another reason why I thoroughly do believe Tolkien would despise them. Ian McKellen was proud. He was a man that had pride. Pride in his profession, and pride in his ability to make a difference for those he saw in many places of the world who were still being prosecuted, and still are persecuted. Excuse me. English is not my first language, and I do mess those two up an awful lot. But today, when pride simply means taking unwarranted pride, means taking pride in your sexuality of all things, what is that? How important a part of you is that? How important is your preference there? Is that really something to be taking pride in? And not to mention as well, even if it was such a time where you could be openly proud, at the very least say, yes, I am this, and there's nothing wrong with that, it has gone so far beyond that. It has now become a political tool and a weapon. In fact, one of the organization which Ian McKellen was a founder of, Stonewall, has recently gotten in trouble with British authorities for telling a university to remove people who were invited to speak at the university because of their perceived political stances or opinions. In other words, Stonewall has actively discriminated against people in a clear and blatant violation of UK law. Oh, how far the proud have indeed fallen. This is where the fandom is right now. This is where it is. This is one of the largest voices within the fandom. Now, again, there are a lot of sane people in the comments that are arguing against this openly, vehemently, and clearly, and it needs to continue. It needs to be loud, it needs to be strident, it needs to be insistent, and it needs to be spread far and wide. Retweet people who are talking about it. Retweet videos who are talking about it. Share it around. Start the argument to try and say what remains of Tolkien's legacy before it is completely torn apart by jackals, by hyenas who do not care one iota about this setting, and will happily see it ruined so long as there's a fancy little flag flying next to the pile of rubble. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see you all again soon. Have a good day.